everyone, welcome back to Deeper Roots. One of the things that gets on people's nerves about Christianity is how centered it is on men being the leaders of the church or the household. If you aren't familiar, the Bible talks about how women aren't supposed to lead in the church context, and even goes as far as saying that women shouldn't even speak in the presence of a man. So, what gives? Are we supposed to ignore this part of the Bible, or are we supposed to just suppress women? Or is there really a third, true option that God really wants us to take? We did have a podcast on this with a full women's cast, but that conversation was more oriented about the women's role in the home. Today, our listener asks, why can't women preach? I think both conversations are extremely insightful. So if you want to get perspective on the role of a woman and how God's role for them doesn't mean inferiority or suppression, I suggest listening to this conversation and also our other conversation. The link to that one will be in the description. This question was submitted online, and you can submit your own question online using the form on our webpage, which is found at www.ibbvn.org/deeperroots. There, you can find more than just the form. You can find the rest of our episodes and the streaming platforms that we're on. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, your family, your church, and anyone else you want to share it with. That way they can enjoy it as well, and they can ask their own questions. Thank you for joining us today. Now let's get to the conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to Deeper Roots. I want to thank everyone for joining us again today. Today we have myself, we have Pastor Luis, and we also have Esther. We're going to get started with the first question today, which is, why can't women preach? The listener asked, and they clarified, why do we have to wear head coverings? In response to, why do women have to wear head coverings? Pastor, do you want to get started?
All right. Yes. Great question. It is a great question, but at the same time, it is a very delicate question. People call it this question that sometimes is polemic, I guess they call it, controversial. People can get up in arms about it, especially today when we're talking about living in a society where we're going through the liberation of women and equality of women. And the Bible is very clear about the equality of women as far as value and personhood and everything. I think as Christians in the past, we've done a disservice to Christianity in making women less. But at the same time, this is a question that deals more not so much with the value or God's desire for women to serve Him, but it's more about the order in which God designed for the woman to be of service in the church. So I guess before we start there, what are some of the things you've run into, Esther here today and Derek, that you've heard about this issue? Have you encountered this issue personally, as far as some people being pro women preaching and being pastors? And maybe have you encountered the other extreme where people feel like women should never even give a what's it called, a word of thanks in church, that a woman should never even approach the platform in church? So what have you encountered?
I think I can talk a lot just because I'm a woman growing up.
Yes, you are.
So I can talk many layers. I know growing up, this is a controversial topic because of what we experience, meaning we have our culture. I'm just thinking about me growing up. I had this question of why I couldn't and boys could. I think there's a cultural aspect for me personally, coming from a Latin culture where I come from a typical one. I would be in the kitchen and my brothers would be playing video games, and that heavy culture where women are doing things and men are not, right? Mm-hmm. That inequality. And then also there's the society layer. So I think when we as believers read this, we're shocked, and where it bothers us, there's a little bit of a uncomfortableness when we read that. We're like, wait, why is that okay? Why are girls different or not equal to men in this situation? And I can dig deeper into it, but just to say that it just takes time. It took me time of really reading my Bible and understanding the biblical truth, to push away the social, the cultural, to understand really what that meant. Sort of.
Have you encountered any of the liberal side of, the legalistic side of this issue? I have, and where you have some people that do believe women should just basically come into church and never open up their mouth. They take that passage we're going to read in a little while very literally, and when women should not teach Sunday school except maybe little children, or women should not have anything to do with a ministry where you're welcoming or whatever, And there's some extreme groups as well as that. Have you had any? With that?
I just know that there has been a history. I haven't experienced too much myself besides the expectation of the opposite, but I can explain what I mean by that later. But what I've seen with women is just, it's more about how they can't even open their mouths, like don't open your mouth in the presence of a man kind of thing. But that's a very like Hollywood thing at this point. So I haven't actually been in that sort of environment much, at least as I've been growing up. But the pressure that there's like the expectation of the opposite for the guy, like because the women can't be leaders, and you often see that women want to be in positions of leadership. At least some women do. So I need to be even more fervent, or I need to be even more ready to be in a leadership position because I am a guy. At least that is by my personality, or by the expectation that's been put upon me. But that's it, just kind of the expectation of the opposite for the guy. But we're talking about women right now. We're talking about this thing. And also, just to note, before we continue, we usually would try to do like an all women's episode. We did an all women's episode a little while ago about what is the woman's role in the household. This is kind of a similar string of thought. If you want, you can go take a look at that question. It's an all women's cast in that podcast. Esther's leading it, and I know they had a really good conversation right there at that time, and we hope to just continue that same energy going forward, just going biblically.
Amen. So let's go to the passage where this controversy comes from. It's found in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 through 14. It says, "This is a faithful saying, for if we died with him, we shall also live with him." Sorry, do I have the right? Sorry, it's 1 Timothy. I don't have the right passage. That's what happens when you have a first and a second. Okay, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. It says, "Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing, if they continue in faith, love, and holiness, and with self-control." So here in this passage where Paul is writing to Timothy, he was the pastor in Ephesus. He's addressing an issue that was going on there. But before we get into that issue, it does reference Adam and Eve. So let us talk about, first of all, what is the role of the woman that God intends for a woman to have basically in the marriage role? Because that's, like you said, it's connected to that like that episode that the girls did. Because when it comes to that's the issue that many people have with having a position like this, that saying women should not preach, because people feel like we're making women less, or women are less valuable, or machismo kind of thing, that basically it's chauvinism. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, did God create women to have a different role than men? And that's where we have to start, because we are not the creators, and God is the one that created us, and he gave us a certain order that we need to learn to submit to. So the question is, did he create an order? And the answer is yes. God created man to be the leader of the home, to be the leader in society in general, but not without the helpmate or the need of having women there to help and to also be next to them as they lead. And that's the thing today, that when people are thinking of the liberation movement and women being equal in everything, they think that by assigning a woman another role, you're making them less than. And that's not true. It's like in any organization, when you have a leader, you're going to have other people that are going to support that leader in different roles, but that doesn't make them any less people or of value. That just means their role is a different role that they have to make. Vice president is not the president, but he's there to be a supplement and a help to the president, or any example you want to give.
Or she in this
or she
age.
And today, yeah, we have a woman, Vice
Harris.
President Kamala Harris, or Kamala. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Kamala.
Depends on how you want to pronounce it.
Not irrelevant,
but so the thing is this: do we accept the biblical model of creation that women were not created to be the main leaders? And that's the thing. So people have to contend with that before we can get into a passage like that. And you look at the Bible, and it's clear that woman is supposed to be the helpmate, not the leader. And I think that's part of the reason now Paul is writing to Timothy, because see, this is a tendency you're going to always see in any church, especially in the church, because that's where the devil definitely want to pervert the order. You will see women wanting to be the leaders. And that's pretty much in every church. You see women are always the first ones to volunteer, to want to lead a ministry. And then you have the men being the passive persons, the passive role, where they're just, we'll let them do it, And that's also in marriage, where you see the woman being the one doing all the work in child rearing and guiding the home, and the man just wants to drink something and watch TV. He doesn't want to really take an active role. And the reason we see that is because there is always going to be this innate nature in us from our sinful nature that wants to pervert the God-given roles. So men want to be passive because it goes against the natural order which God established, and women will want to be dominant because it goes against the established order that God gave, and that comes from our sinful nature. So you see that a lot in churches, and you see that a lot in different organizations as well. Marriages as well, where you see the mom or the wife being the dominant one as well. And so why is it so important for us to keep the God-given order of man and woman as far as their roles? Not value. They're both valuable. And they're both necessary, but they're both necessary to keep their roles as well. Why is it important, do you think?
I think that with roles, there's structure. If something can actually have if something is going to grow, it's going to need planning, it's going to need structure. And God created man to have certain things, to have certain skills, and God created woman to have other certain skills. And a lot of the time, men can't do everything almost all the time. Like we're going to need help, and oftentimes it's going to be the help of a woman in some shape or form. It's just a different way that everybody's wired, not just as individuals. Like everybody's individually wired differently, but typically you're going to have women who are going to be wired differently than guys. At least that's from my understanding. Like, what was Pastor T?
End observation. Very different than us.
Like Pastor Talavera, he would talk about how, I think it was Pastor Talavera who would talk about how like the like men were like spaghetti and waffles, that idea. Yes. Maybe Esther, do you want to go into that, because you know that example a little bit better than I do?
No, Pastor Talavera, we call him Pastor T. Pastor T would just what Derek was talking about, the difference between men and women and how we think and how we do things. Men are very
compartmentalizing.
Yes, and that's why it's the waffle illustration. Whereas women, we're all connected in so many ways. Emotionally, we're all connected, and we can do so many things at the same time. For the most part, men can't do that, but that's a whole different story.
So going back to that, though, which is true, again, you have to realize that we are in a world where that's trying to pull us from our God-given roles. Men wanting to be passive, women wanting to be dominant. But why is it that at the end of the day it doesn't work? Is because the way we're wired. Like you said, the man is wired in a way, like you said, we compartmentalize things. And why do you think that's important for leadership?
To know the
And
priorities.
again, doesn't mean that a woman can't be part of leadership. It doesn't mean that woman can't be a help to leadership. But the reason is because when it comes to making decisions, one of the main things that always gets in the way of making a good decision is emotions. And that's why men, if they're a good leader, and there's a lot of men who are not, because they haven't mastered that, first of all, taking the helm, taking leadership role, but B, also learning to shut their emotions off and being able to see a situation clearly without letting emotions get in the way.
I think that it goes a little bit past that, though. I think, like, obviously the emotions thing is something that is a concern, that can be a concern. Like you see that in Star Trek, right? Like the reason why, like, what's Spock?
Data.
Spock.
You're talking about
Data.
You're thinking about.
Well, no, but Spock, like, maybe in the movies,
Spock,
but like Spock,
they're emotionless.
like
yeah,
Klingon, Klingon, right?
No, he's a Vulcan.
Vulcan. I'm bad at this. I'm sorry. I'm a nerd, but I'm bad at that.
Oh, I'm a Trekkie, so I'll correct you. Don't
worry. He's a Vulcan, and like he thinks logically, and because he's Spock is half Vulcan, half human, he also has those emotions. It turns out that's what makes him the perfect leader. But with it's instead of calling it just the emotions, though, I think it's further than the emotions. I think it's the focus. Emotions can cause a lack of focus. Like when someone's heartbroken, when someone's angry, they will become unfocused and they will not see what the true ideal path forward is. But it's mainly that focus. If someone's not focused, someone's tired, someone's sleepy, someone's just not going to be able to put their all into a decision or into the things that they're doing.
So you're saying women are not focused?
No. But it's just like when it goes back to like the spaghetti versus the waffles, right? It's
the emotions. Like I think what you're saying is correct. That yes, what we're getting at is the focus issue. That we need to be able to focus on an issue without being able to let the emotions
Other things get in the way.
Yeah, which is what men do better. Not always better, but do better than women. We do that better because we are able to put our emotions aside and focus, and that's like you're saying, focus on the issue, and they say, look at it dispassionately. That's what they use, dispassionate. While a woman sometimes has to deal with a lot of emotions, and that's why the comparison is spaghetti to waffles, right? Because a guy can.
Are you saying that spaghetti is more emotional than waffles?
It is. No, basically, they're thinking, which is also part of the beauty. That's what makes a woman a wonderful helpmate.
Well, I think that the thing we haven't said is they complement each other.
Exactly. It's
that's the most important thing. God created us to complement each other.
Have you had spaghettis and waffles together in dinner time?
It would be the perfect meal.
We're gonna have to try it. I know.
But I think that's the important thing to say just out loud. I think we are assuming it, but the role of a man and a woman is to complement each other. And yes, the man will have to make the ultimate decision, but with the woman's perspective, because she does see things in a different light, right?
Sure.
And that's where the man has to put all the cards on the table and, with the Lord's help and all of that, and make the decision with the input of his wife, because we see things that you guys don't see. We see things very differently.
And that's the beauty of what God could put in the woman, that they're able to see different perspectives than we can. And they're able to advise us. And then we can see and make a dispassionate decision, But when a woman is charged with that responsibility, it's a very taxing thing. Can a woman be a leader? Yes, but she would have to sort of try to mold herself and reject the very thing that makes her a great helpmate, first and foremost. So we have to deal with God's given roles, that God did put woman in a different role than man. And that works both in the home as much as in the church. But here then in Timothy, when Paul is writing to Timothy, the reason he says this, and this is what I want to get to here in verse 11 again, it says, here it goes. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, authority over men, but to be in, I skipped here. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. So here we would have to go a little bit also into the other letters that Paul also wrote, where it seems in the early church that was already becoming a problem, where women were trying to be dominant. Same like churches today. You see that a lot in the Pentecostal circles today, where everything's done by the woman, and the woman's the ones that's running the show basically, and men just take a back seat to that, and that's not God honoring, because it doesn't honor God's order, and that's what was going on in the church. So he's like, hey, women need to take a secondary role to the man when it comes to teaching. So is there a biblical reason for which we would say, yeah, women should preach or women should be pastors? There isn't. On the contrary, the Bible says women should take a secondary role to the man, and she should not have authority over a man in teaching. And I think here you can get into a little bit of debate as well, because some people say, well, for example, Hermana Esther, she's a teacher here at our church, and she teaches the college and career, right? But it's not talking about the act of teaching. It's talking about having the authority in a biblical church, and this is the context from which this passage comes from, that a woman should not be exercising a role of a pastor over a church, should not be the one principally teaching in church over men. When you have men that can do it. Here, honestly, one of the reasons that Hermana Esther is our teacher for college and career, because there is no guy that can do it the way she does. And part of it is also because we're a bilingual church. We have men that could do it, but they lack the English to be able to use it. And she does an excellent job. But it's not like Hermana Esther is pretending to be pastor. Me. Hey, I'm the pastor here, So, and she and you see that because you're in her class, right? Yeah. You see that, like even right now, you were saying we're going to talk to pastor, right? What was it that you brought up?
Well, I always check in with you. About
she always
stuff.
says,
like,
we're going to talk
we were talking about Christmas dinner, and we had talked about a certain time. And then something came up, and I said, wait, we have to talk to pastor, because that's not something we talked about.
And she does a wonderful job with that. She's always wanting to go and check in, and we work together as a team with the ladies and the men in our church as a leadership. And so it doesn't mean women can't be part of leadership. It just shouldn't be a pastor. Shouldn't be a main teacher of the Word of God in a church. That is delegated to man.
I also want to just add on that, when we take a different role that's not ours, we don't feel complete or joyful. And I think that's a big thing. I see that with women who are trying to be the dominant, for example, in a marriage. They're tired, they feel irritated. But with, not to say that there's perfection when we take each other's roles, or we take the role that God has given us, but there is more harmony. There's more satisfaction when we do take our biblical roles in whatever area, not just marriage, just in overall.
In church.
Well, here's an impromptu follow-up question for that. Do you think that's more of a cultural thing that we've grown accustomed to, rather than something that is by human nature? So the reason why I'm asking is because, like, for example, like stay-at-home dads, right? Obviously, like if the woman has maybe a different set of credentials and is able to provide for the house, and then the husband and the wife, they talk about it, and they decide that the wife is going to be using her income and providing for the family, and the man will stay at home with the kids. That's obviously like a little bit of a flip on what, culturally speaking, we are used to, and also it's kind of a flip on what the Bible says too. So is with these kind of like stay-at-home dads and other of the same sort, other roles of the same sort coming up, is it more of a cultural thing and a cultural expectation that can be changed over the course of a few generations, or is it something that is inherent to human nature?
It's inherent in our human nature to have these roles. A lot of issues, it's sometimes in marriages, come because the man feels emasculated, and it may be conscious or may be subconscious. Where, he's being a great guy, trying to do the right thing and helping his wife out and being home and taking care of the kids because she's a professional and she works, which is fine to a degree. But then there comes a time when the guy feels like he's not really being fulfilled as a man. And because we as men, we run on two things. We run on admiration and respect. That's what we run on. You want a happy man, you need to let him know he's respected. Mm-hmm. And he's admired. That's what we all want. And what does a woman want? Biblically speaking, because that's what we go to Ephesians 6, and it says, women, submit and honor your husbands. And then it says, men, love your wives like Christ loved the church. A woman runs on what? Love and feeling protected. Stability, feeling protected, that she's being cared for. And you might try to make it work out of that order, but it's in the end that, like she said, it doesn't really fulfill. It takes a while until you realize, no, this is not working. I'm not, and a lot of problems arise from that. So it's not just a societal thing; it's a innate order that God created, and that should be honored.
So here's the first follow-up question that I actually wrote down. So, like, the quote patriarchy, like, is it? Some people relegate this idea of women can't lead in the household or women can't lead in the church to men just wanting to keep their power, trying to keep women down and to keep them out of power. It's a power complex.
Yeah, and like we always say in this podcast and in the church, there's two extremes. Mm-hmm. There is two extremes. There is that part of society that's the macho society that wants to keep women down and not make the proper use of their God-given skills of letting them be part of their like you would say, their circle of advisors and help in the leadership in their home, in the church. And instead just pushes them down and doesn't, you're a woman, you don't tell me what to do, kind of thing, That's not a good leader, and that's not a good man, because a good man will make use of the women that are around to counsel him, to help him, to help be part of his leadership. When you look at Jesus' ministry, he was surrounded by women, but all the leadership roles were given to the men. But that doesn't mean he ever demeaned women or never benefited or treated them wrong or treated them as less than. Instead, I think
it's
a lot opposite, yeah.
Because they were the first ones to see him after the resurrection.
Right? And plus, like, a woman was used to be one of the first people to publicize his ministry in John 4. Yeah,
the Samaritan woman. It's like women were elevated by Jesus in a society that actually did put down women, and they treated them as second-class citizens or third or fourth, And
women do have leadership roles. It's just not the pastor, and that's the mindset that needs to change of men and women. Like, as Pastor was saying, men not to think that they need to keep them down in the power trip, but also as women for us to understand that the biblical roles. And what is leadership for me as a woman in the church, in my home? I do have, if I were married with kids, I have a lot of responsibilities at home, raising the kid, their health. There's a lot of leadership in the woman, but it comes from, if I were married with my husband, having conversations. So I think there's a wrong perspective of what leadership is in the mindset of people when it comes to that, or this conversation that we just need to explain clearly that women are leaders. They're just not pastors. It's just different. It's a different type of leadership.
Okay.
And if we want to also look at, when we're talking about, is there an order to things? Did God create man as leader, the main leader of like the church and the main leader of the home, especially those two arenas? We have to also look at, why does God represent himself as a man or in the masculine, right? Because, the people that don't want to believe in the Bible and don't believe the Bible is given to us from God, they'll just say, well, it was written by men and therefore they put God as a man because they wanted to be chauvinist. But if we truly believe that God did give us this book and he's the one that wrote it, then why did he choose to represent himself as a man? And that's because that's the order which he created things. He knows we would not be able to take maybe him as seriously if he represented himself as a woman, when he's put within our DNA that men should be the leaders, or that's the way we're wired. Of course, society pushes us the other way, but it's like Esther said, it's never going to satisfy. It sort of works against God's purposes and our own happiness and joy and peace.
Okay. And the last follow-up question that I have is on the topic of emotions, ethics, and leadership. So we're talking about how emotions are a part of the reason why women are wired to not, or women are wired in a different way, and for that reason, God says it needs to be more of the helpers rather than the top leaders. But we look at the world nowadays, and we see a lot of decisions, especially made by men. Considering that most of the people in power are men, a lot of the decisions in the world are very unethical. Like you can think about what's going on with the environment. You can think about what's going on in politics. Whatever you want to think about, whatever example you want to have, it's a lot of it is unethical. And what seems to bring people back from things that are unethical seem to be emotions. So using emotions within leadership seems to also have a positive to it. It's not all negative. So
that's where a good leader, a good man will use the good women that are surround him to advise him. That's the balance. That's the complement. That alone, if we don't use women as our helpmates to be able to advise us, to be able to let us see the other perspective, the emotional more perspective of things, and give us that counterbalance, then we tend to fall into that very unethical situations where we just do things whatever, money driven, or we're not really led. But the other extreme just as bad, where it's just all emotions, but there's no real decisive thought into what we're doing and the consequences of a decision if it's just driven by emotions only. And that's why it's a compliment. Again, we're not saying women should not be part of a leadership team, but in the context of the church, the Bible only gives the authority to the pastor, a man. But in any other context, even in a church, it'd be wise for a wise leader to make use of the advice of women in his church, because that will make him a better leader. It'll help him to counterbalance that tendency that we have as men. And then the other tendency in some men is just to be passive and let women run the show. And then that is a bad disservice to you and also to the church you're leading.
And also not to say that men won't make bad decisions. You know what I mean? Just because they're men, and yes, you can push away emotions, it doesn't mean you're not going to make a wrong decision. I mean, that's where the Bible comes in and play, your relationship with the Lord, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's also important to say that, because just because, everyone's human, and also there are bad men leaders in the world. It's just how it is. And
being a man isn't going to guarantee you the right decision, and being a woman isn't going to guarantee you the wrong decision.
Exactly.
That's the point. It's that balance and the biblical truth that goes with it, of being able to use a Bible truth to make decisions in what needs to be done.
And lastly, I think the question also included a little follow-up.
Oh yeah, there was a follow-up to this one. And why do we have to wear head coverings?
Yeah, that's sort of a little different in the sense of what we're talking about, because the main question is about can a woman be a pastor? And the answer is no. Biblically, no. It doesn't go with the order which God has established both for mankind as a whole, but also especially in the context of the church. But that question's more in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where it talks about women wearing a head covering and making sure their hair is long and stuff like that. But that is an example of, like you were saying before the recording,
Before we were recording.
that it's a matter of the culture that they were living in. Yeah, there
It's
are
like
gonna be-
it's a matter of it being relevant to or being relatable to the people reading, because it was a letter. It was a letter to the Corinthians.
Corinthians.
So like, back in that time, women would be wearing head coverings, and if we can. Do you want to read the passage
Sure.
where that's from?
It's,
Because
first-
I can't remember the context of it.
Sure, let me read as much as I can here because it's a long passage. But
Yeah.
it's
Maybe
1
the
Corinthians
portion
11.
beforehand.
Yeah, it says, "But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of a woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. For if a woman is not covered, let her also be shorn. But it is shameful for a woman to be shorn or shaved, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and the glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. For man is not from the woman, but the woman from the man. Nor was man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels." So here, that verse is the key thing. Should have a symbol of authority because of the angels. In their culture, that's how they represented authority. That the woman was in the submissive role as they covered her head. So that was a cultural thing. It's not something relevant to our church today or to churches today. It's not like you have to. If a woman wants to
It's
cover
to
her
American
head,
culture, Jay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if a woman wants to, if she's cold, she wants to cover her head, it's fine. But it's not so much that it was a cultural thing that if a woman had an uncovered head, that showed like she was rebelling and she was wanting to be in the role of man, and that's how a woman would show submission. And it's still in the Islam world today. That's how a woman perceives it the same way. So culturally today, for example, if you were a missionary in Afghanistan or Iraq, do you think a woman should wear a covering? Probably. Yeah, if you're a missionary, a Christian missionary, and you're there to preach the gospel, should a woman probably cover her head? Yeah, because it's going to be a huge obstacle culturally to the people you're trying to reach.
Can't win them.
Because because to them, it's still that. A woman without a covering is a woman that is being rebellious and not being submissive. So that's why it's a cultural context there.
Okay. And I believe that closes the episode for today. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate the questions that are coming in. If you want to ask your own question, you can do so by going to our website, www.ibbvn.org/deeperroots. That should be in the description. Whether it's you want to ask a question that you want a little bit more clarification on, or ask your own original question, that's up to you. Just go ahead and submit a question online using the link that just said, and this is also in the description. Thank you for joining us this weekend. We hope that you'll join us next week. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Deeper Roots. If you want to submit a question, follow up on something we talked about on the podcast, or you want to find us online, you can go to our webpage, which is ibbvn.org/deeperroots. Deeper Roots is a ministry of Iglesia Bíblica Baptista Vida Nueva, which is a local church in Castro Valley, California. And you can learn more about us and our church by going to our website, ibbvn.org.